Hi everybody, welcome to this new tutorial video. This is for textbook chapter 2.2 titled Properties of Water. And in this video we'll try to solve the mystery of how this spider can actually sit on the surface of the water. It's not floating, it's literally sitting on the surface, and we'll talk more about that, but the properties of water have something to do with it. Let's also consider this photograph before we continue with the rest of our video. This photograph very well could have been taken in winter in Vermont. This pond is freezing from the top down. That's because when water freezes into its solid form, ice is less dense than liquid water, and that's a very unique property among substances on Earth. Most other liquids, when they freeze, are more dense than their liquid form. But water doesn't do that. Water is actually less dense. And so ponds freeze from the top down, and that has very important biological consequences that we'll talk about also in this video. So here's our main idea for the video, and that is that water's unique properties, both chemical and physical properties, allow life to exist on Earth. In other words, water is a very special molecule and a very special kind of substance, and I hope to prove that to you in this video. Water's unique properties stem from the fact that the actual molecule itself has different charges, different electric charges on different ends of the molecule, and so we call it a polar molecule because it has two separate poles. It has a positive side, which is the more hydrogen side of the molecule, and the more negative side, which is the oxygen side of the molecule. And that has to do with the fact that the bonding that's going on between the hydrogen and oxygens isn't actually equal. The electrons being shared in the covalent bonds are not equally shared between the hydrogen and the oxygen. The oxygen actually hogs the electrons just a little bit more, and so it's actually a little bit more negative. And that's why the oxygen side of the molecule is marked with a negative sign, and the hydrogen side of the molecule is marked with a positive sign. And we call that a polar molecule, and it has a very important consequence for the properties of water. For example, when you put more than one water molecule in the same space, like you have a volume of water, the water molecules are going to orient themselves in a very special way. In fact, the more positive side of the molecule, the side of the hydrogens, is actually going to be attracted to the more negative side, or the oxygen, of an adjoining water molecule. So they form the structure that you can see here on the screen, where the white or hydrogen side of the molecule is highly attracted to the more negative or the red side of a nearby oxygen of the adjoining water molecule. And we call this attraction a hydrogen bond, and it actually is a bond. These water molecules sort of bond with each other, but it's not quite like the bond that the oxygen and the hydrogen within the water molecule actually have, which is a covalent bond, which is a very strong bond. By comparison, hydrogen bonds are actually quite weak. And it probably looks a little bit more like this scenario here, where you have lots of water molecules. They're all in different orientations, but no matter what orientation they're in, the positive or hydrogen side of the molecule is going to be attracted to the negative or oxygen side of the nearby water molecule, and so you're going to get these interactions of all these water molecules. So what kind of effect do the hydrogen bonds have on the properties of water? Well, the first thing we know is that we have to input a lot of energy in order to get those hydrogen bonds to break, in order to separate water molecules from each other. And we all know, for example, when we boil water, that it takes a lot of energy. A pot of water takes a while to boil. In fact, it takes a lot of energy to get it to actually boil. Now, when it's boiling, the water is evaporating, and each individual water molecule is escaping from that pot of water as water vapor. So the water molecules are separating from each other and leaving the volume of water to go into the air as water vapor. But they have to separate from each other first before they can do that, and we know that that requires a lot of energy because it takes a lot of energy on the stovetop to actually get it to do that. We also know this happens in nature, where you have puddles in the sunshine. It takes a while for that puddle to evaporate because it takes a lot of energy input from the sun to warm it up enough in order to get those water molecules to separate from each other because of those hydrogen bonds, so that that water can finally evaporate. But there's some more properties. Let's go back to our pond. Another property that water has because of its hydrogen bonds is a high specific heat. This means that water resists changes in temperature. Now, the air temperature in this photograph, or in the place where this photograph was taken, is probably freezing or below freezing. That's because the air temperature can change quickly, but the water you can see here is still not completely frozen or even frozen over. So the water temperature resists change, or the water resists changes in temperature. So it's going to cool down and freeze slowly, where the air is going to cool down a heck of a lot more quickly. And you know this in the autumn months and even in the spring months, where you can get really drastic air temperature changes, but the water in the streams and the lakes and the ponds doesn't immediately freeze or immediately melt. And this has consequence in the springtime too, where we have these vernal pools where organisms such as amphibians gather to breed. If these vernal pools were to heat up quickly and therefore evaporate quickly, then this wouldn't be a habitat that these organisms could use as a breeding ground. It just so happens that water heats up slowly just like it cools down slowly, and that's because of the hydrogen bonds. Water also has a property called cohesion, where water molecules are attracted to each other. They really like each other. So the water droplets in this photograph are made of lots of water molecules that are all attracted to each other. And you can see that a little bit better in this full photograph of this nice looking damselfly, which looks like it's either been doused with water, or maybe this photograph was taken in the morning when the morning dew was still all over this organism. You can also see the droplets of water on the leaf. They're always forming these spherical shapes because they're always attracted to each other, and that's because of the hydrogen bonding. And hydrogen bonding and cohesion also allows our water spider to sit on the surface of the water. The phenomenon known as surface tension is unique to water. Water molecules are attracted to each other, so they don't want to leave each other. They don't want to separate from each other. So this spider can sit on the thin film of water molecules that are right on the surface of the water. And because it doesn't weigh very much, it's not straining the water molecule skin or surface tension enough to break it. But if it were to break that surface tension, it would sink into the water. But it doesn't, because it doesn't weigh a lot and it can sit right on the surface of the water. And that's because of cohesion, and that's because water molecules have hydrogen bonds between them. There's also a property of adhesion, where water molecules are attracted to other things. For example, the water molecules in the test tube here are attracted to the glossy surface of the glass, and so they kind of creep up and stick to the sides of the glass, which is why every time you look at a graduated cylinder or a volume of water in a test tube, it's always in a curved surface. Now, the other fluid in the other test tube here is mercury. It actually has a higher cohesion than it does adhesion, and so not a lot of adhesion going on here, but more cohesion, where those mercury molecules are actually attracted to each other more than they're attracted to the sides of the glass test tube. And adhesion has a very important property. It allows the water molecules, or the volume of water, to actually climb up tubes of water. Now, where are you going to find tubes of water in nature? Well, you'll find them inside plants. So inside the roots and stems and leaves of plants are microscopic tubes. And because water has the property of adhesion and cohesion, water tends to, all by itself, sort of creep up thin tubes and sort of fight gravity. And you know this because if you've probably seen people, your teachers or somebody, stick a celery stalk in some water with food coloring in it, and the leaves of the celery become colored because the water is creeping up those thin tubes which are inside the celery. And if you've ever broken a celery stalk in half, you can actually see those tubes inside that celery stalk. So let's have a summary of our video before we end. We know that water is a polar molecule. We know that because of this polarity, hydrogen bonds form between or among water molecules, and because of hydrogen bonding, we get some very unique traits of water. It has a high specific heat, which means that water resists changes in temperature, and that's very important for biological systems. We also get properties called cohesion and adhesion, which means that water either is attracted to itself, so that's cohesion, or attracted to other substances or surfaces, and that's adhesion. And that has also very important biological consequences. So let's finish with our main idea here, that water's unique properties allow life to exist on Earth. If water didn't have a high specific heat or have a unique property whereby when it freezes, the solid ice actually floats and ponds freeze from the top down, the life in this pond would die. And so water's unique properties allow all kinds of organisms to continue to exist here on Earth, whether they're living in water or whether that water is inside their cells or inside their body. So that's chapter 2.2, Properties of Water. I'll see you for the next tutorial video.